Let's talk about agriculture. We've been having conversations around agriculture on this show quite often because we understand that it is one of those very critical sectors of Kenya's economy. A majority of Kenya's population, directly or indirectly, depends on agriculture. Okay? So you've seen several things. In those years when I was in school, when you were a teacher,
Wow.
Yes.
we were
I
taught.
realize
Put
that's
it
a heavy
correctly.
laden statement, don't you?
Yes.
I'm a very young
It is
man.
appropriate.
You won't forget it.
Those are
I'm a
accolades.
very young man. So, in those days, we were taught about the way the agriculture sector was organized, and it was very clear how it used to be organized. So, first of all, those in dairy had an aggregator. So, smallholder dairy farmers had an aggregator called the Kenya Cooperative Creameries, just using the whole cooperative movement.
KCC.
Those who are grain growers had an aggregator called the Kenya Grain Growers Cooperative Union. Those who are in the coffee sector had the Kenya Planters Cooperative.
Actually, it was Kenya Farmers Association before that.
And then
Actually.
there's Kenya Farmers Association,
Yes.
right? And then there was also the organization of how you can access credit for all these farmers. It was properly organized. And then things went, as things go, global warming, everything else, brains,
Climate change.
blah, blah, blah. We saw a couple of changes, and we have, for example, now seeing the push and pull and the clamor for reforms in the tea sector. We have seen the push and pull and clamor for reforms in the sugarcane sector. We are seeing the same. Pyrethrum, which was one of the key cash crops of this country, now there's all this conversation of how can we revive pyrethrum? How shall we? It starts, it stops.
How can
Start,
we revive
stop.
cotton?
How can we revive cotton, which is a key cash crop in this country? Coffee. Many coffee farmers got to a point where they got so disillusioned and feeling so let down by this crop that used to work very well for them that they just went and cut their coffee bushes. Those that stayed pushed for reforms, and reforms were implemented. So one of the things that has happened is that the president the other day said, all right, so let's have these reforms. The CS in charge of agriculture said, let's reform the Kenya Planters Cooperative Union, and now it was called the new KPCU. A new board was instituted. It's in place. We want to talk about what has happened since then. But at the same time, there's some good news as coffee farmers reap big because the sector has made 17 billion shillings. Now, this is big because coffee farmers will basically get higher earnings this year, depending on various factors per farmer, quality of your crop. But let's bring in the chairman of the new Kenya Planters Cooperative Union. His name is Henry Kinyua, and he joins us now on the line. Good morning, Henry.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to the Situation Room.
Thank you.
We'll start off, we'll go into the whole conversation of the reforms in the coffee sector, the journey towards this and how far you've gone. But let's first of all understand the new KPCU. Why new and what are you doing?
I think it's an interesting part. New KPCU came in office in 2019, like December 2019, and with three mandates. Number one, to support farmers in marketing their coffee. Two, support milling and milling of the farmers' coffee. And thirdly, to administer the coffee cherry advance revolving fund. So that's the three mandates that we have been doing, and we have made tremendous progress in each and every pillar that we have established to work on.
Do you represent all coffee farmers in the country, or do you only represent the smallholder farmers?
And I think the coffee, I think it is now the way it is done as a product, and therefore support all coffee farmers. That is, now I think maybe let's go straight. Well, when it comes to milling, we mill for everybody, small and large. If we go for, we go for marketing, we can also market for small and large, so every coffee farmer in Kenya. However, when it works with Coffee Cherry Advance Revolving Fund, the regulations that govern that piece of fund is very specific, that it is more to smallholder farmers and estates that grow coffee, technicals and below. So that one is very, very specific.
So if I may just ask, because I'd like to know, so what is this thing that you are now doing which was not done before, or are you simply continuing with the activities that the organization has done in the past?
I think the thing is, you can see we are currently doing maybe we would be more or less is what we're doing it now, doing a bit better. In terms of something that was, or rather we're doing differently, but now I can see the Coffee State Advanced Revolving Fund, but also we looked at the milling. In fact, like the milling, we looked at it as we are milling, see what exactly are the real issues, and or what leads to farmers' disillusionment. As you understand, coffee has different stages. The farmers harvest the red cherry. It is pulped at their factory and then dried to what we call parchment. That parchment is that what is now sold or delivered to the dry miller for it to be milled into clean coffee that is marketed. And that is at the stage where you have different grades, about 7 grades. And those conversions, if they are not properly addressed, can have their own issues. So what we did as a new KPCU and we came on board was to ensure there is proper transparency at the milling. So we say before the coffee is milled, the farmer, all the representatives must be there so that by the time it is milled, they see what their grades are. And that again has reverberated all across. That I see them now that is planning to be part of the proposed Coffee Act to ensure that there is that transparency. Because once that is well done, even when you go to the market, it becomes easier for the farmer to follow what they produce. Is it actually what was taken to the market?
There's as we're having this conversation basically about tea and the tea sector and the kind of reforms, you get to understand just by talking to tea farmers and those in the sector that it's a very complex industry, right? There are people who play at various levels. There's a farmer all the way to marketing it, and there are very many players in there who have a specific role that they play, which is also, quite complex. And then the conversation then goes into, so how do you get to understand or to unpack the sector, and so that then you're able to bring in the reforms that would make sure that they're benefiting every player in the sector. And if every player in the sector needs to benefit, or there are some that needs to be removed. And I think these are some of the questions that, when you hear reforms, you ask, what does reform mean?
And even just to kind of change the way things have been operating previously. Because if you look at the chain of operation, it just seems that there's so many people in the middle. You've got, and at the end of the day, the person who will buy and the person who will produce seem to be almost the most important people in the chain. But everybody in between seems to either be playing a role that would circumvent the process and not aid the process to the point at which farmers would benefit. And more often than not, you hear farmers crying about the same thing over and over. Who regulates the price of their product? How can they make sure that they're getting top dollar for what it is that they're putting in terms of farming inputs and things like that? Who's going to make it easy for them to be able to take their goods to market, kind of thing? Those are their interests. Those are their issues. But it would just seem as if there's this long line of confusion that is in the middle of all of this. And why does it have to be that way? So reforms for many of them would mean take out the middlemen, take out these middle line operations that seem to be making the life of their farming so difficult.
But again, I should ask, does it necessarily mean that the middlemen are unnecessary and that their existence of necessity makes life for the farmers difficult? What is the historical purpose of having these middlemen? And instead of just talking about removing them, what do we talk about when you talk about reform? What is it that needs to be done now that would, in this day and age, be of the most benefit to the farmer? That's the question I would ask. And what are these things that need to be done? Because when you talk about players, it goes to not just the consumer of the product, but the person who makes that particular product consumable.
But what have farmers been complaining about for the longest time, if you want to look at them? How many of them have said, forget it, cut this thing down and let's put up a building where I can get rent and I can actually see a direct result of my input? Because for the longest time, I plant this product 18 months, then I'm able to harvest. And then what am I getting? 20 shillings. Okay, for tea, for example, 21 shillings a kilo. and then and it's regulated by somebody. Is it possible to remove all of these things in the middle that then would allow me to be able to see value for my effort? The cry from many, many tea farmers and coffee farmers over time, coffee farmers has been, we are not able to see our sweat.
But you don't
We
want
cannot even afford our life. And this is something that we spend all our lives putting our
But
efforts into.
you know why that complaint has been there? Because they can go back into, again, history. And there was a time when they benefited immensely from this particular enterprise.
Yeah, when this was a crop that basically you knew that I have coffee, and this is going to help me to take my kids to school. Like you say, take your children to school, live a
On this crop.
life,
It gave you guarantees.
No, it doesn't.
and then you get to a point where you actually don't even know. In fact, at the end of the year, your local union or your local factory is saying that you owe them, having delivered crop to them. And you wonder, so why?
For why am I doing this?
Farmers wake up one morning with a panga and they decide, my friend, we are done with this. And Henry Kinyua, who's the chairman of the new KPCU, understands this very well. He's worked in the industry, in the agriculture sector for quite a while. Henry was CEC for agriculture in Nyeri County. Henry has also worked in Tanzania, advising the president of Tanzania, working in the office of the president in agriculture sector and reforms. So Henry, just coming from that, would I be wrong to assume that you actually have that coffee background while growing up, that you are one of those people who call themselves coffee children?
Yeah, I think the interesting part, maybe I would say, no, I grew up actually in Kieni. So Kieni, we didn't grow coffee.
Okay, yes.
But the interesting part when I graduated from university, my first assignment was in Muranga to work with coffee farmers there. So I started working with training farmers on how to spray, how to harvest. I've had a lot of interaction with coffee from that standpoint, from a professional standpoint, and dealing with farmers, dealing with millers and all the other factors, all the other players in the industry.
So the things that we are talking about, farmers and their frustrations, these are things that you've seen firsthand.
Absolutely.
What are these main frustrations by farmers?
I think it's quite interesting to read it if we can trace back to what issues that when the rain started beating us. There was a time, as you said before, when the industry was very well structured in terms of we had the aggregator, we had a marketer. It was largely more government driven. So we had the coffee board that to do the marketing. We had KPCU that to do the aggregation, milling, and and all handling the part of the input. And then that time also what we had was the extension services the government was working. So farmers was able to receive the extension advice on what to do, when and how. They were able to access inputs on when for what they need, and then they'll be able to get their money when it's paid. However, with the time, we got into liberalization, which was a good thing in one way, responding to some of the global trends. However, the way it was done here was done so poorly that the farmers was left dangling. The farmers was left without any support, and therefore from that time, the farmers lost their incomes, and the farmers, up to now, today, they have not recovered. And that's why you've seen the various reforms they actually been looked into to ensure, number one, the farmer is able to get their rightful pay, and also promptly. Because every farmer all over the world requires just two things: to be paid well and to be paid promptly.
When you say the rain started beating us, I like the phrase, but I'd like you to explain it. In your view, when did the rain start beating the coffee farmer?
I think we've seen quite a bit. There have been at different stages. You can say at the late 90s, the late 80s. We start now from the 88. Things started going bad. Then we had a bit of an improvement. But the late 90s. It's when clearly now things went south completely. One, the model of liberalization was like rushed, in my opinion, and therefore you could find whereby farmers now, we have so many other players, but the farmers themselves are not organized. Instead of the institutions that were there were weakened. And that is why you see even in the new reforms, that the task force that went out, part of the issue that they identified was the need for institutional support. Strengthen the institutions from the farmer institutions all the way to the top, that will be able to ensure
that the value chain is protected. Most importantly, that the farmer is able to receive their the proceeds of their sales, but also be able to get input and advisory that will help them in their business.
Okay, so these reforms, what exactly are we looking at here to get to the point where things were going on really well some 10, 20 years ago, and farmers then could actually see the benefit of their input and the benefit of their effort? So today we are saying we're at the point where reforms are absolutely necessary, and to stop this thing where farmers are saying we're going to burn this crop to the ground and we'd rather put up a building and at least that I can see I can get rent from this thing, right? So what reforms are we looking at, and what are the things that would frustrate a farmer to that point that we now want to get rid of?
Lovely. I think I'll need to look at it, maybe just give you a little bit of a background on how the reforms, particularly the current reforms. In 2016, the President of the Republic of Kenya set up a task force to review what is aiding the coffee industry, review and document what aiding the coffee industry. They went around and came up with about 8 points that needed to be sorted out. One was the legal reforms, ensure there is a comprehensive legal reforms in the industry. They proposed a 3-year subsidy program. This is to ensure that farmers are able to access input. That was not the case before. They also proposed the subject of the coffee cherry advance revolving fund, the one that I said have been now established as being managed by the institution that I chair. Then they talked about modernization of the Nairobi Coffee Exchange. They talked about, again, the youth agenda, because currently if you look at the age of, I think the study I saw was the average age of a coffee farmer is about 65, over 60 years. Then they talked about institutional support, then support marketing, and also the issue of the debt problem. Because one big challenge was that quite a number of these farmers' organizations have they have so many debts. They owe suppliers, they owe different, for many reasons. I mean, there have been a lot of issues in the industry. That is back like what Eric, you were discussing before this, that you take your coffee, it's harvested, you're told, by the way, actually, we are not even paying you, you owe us. And the farmer is like, okay, then can I cut this bloody thing? I mean, it's not helping me. Why would I be paying you guys? So that has been a problem, and I think those are the reforms that are now being looked into to ensure that problem does. So the issue of the debt, I think the issue is going on, and there's an ongoing program. Can we audit all these debts? Which debts are owing to who, and how can that one be addressed? And most important, all these things have been now put together. What happened, I think, then in 2019 or thereabout, when the president then appointed Peter Munya as the CS of Agriculture, with a very clear agenda to reform some of these industries, as we have actually even mentioned them before. For coffee, these things to happen, you need to have a very clear legal framework, and that's why they started with the legal reforms, and that's what we have the ongoing debate on the Coffee Act.
Okay, on a global scale, in terms of exports for coffee, where do we stand? I mean, looking at the country now as a whole, and then what would be able to feed in from Kenya to the globe. If you have all of these rumblings and murmurings on the ground, how then would it affect Kenya's ability then to feed in to a global supply? And how are we looking at getting things back up there?
Oh, lovely. I think we have a big problem. I mean, you have to address and one big issue we have is the issue of volumes. We are so low the volume we are producing that actually they say we have to be humble to appreciate that the world market can move on without Kenyan coffee. But Kenyan coffee cannot move without the world market because we drink less than 5% of our coffee, all the rest we have to export. However, for us to have to be felt in the global market, we have to up our volumes. We have to really ramp up pretty quickly because right now we are less than 2% of the global market. Nobody really, I think, if we don't produce one day, we are not selling. The world will not feel us. So we have to really up our game and make sure that we are there. Right? This year we produce about 35,000 tons of green coffee. We used to do up to about 150,000. So we are actually at a third of what you used to do. The second thing is that the global market still likes our coffee, but some of these commodities, your volumes can be so low that you just become, just you have to be combined with that. It becomes a level that it cannot be properly marketed and branded as a commodity because of all these issues. So I think the main challenge even that have to be addressed with these reforms and everything, is also to ensure that we have the volumes going up. But if you not have the volumes going up, number one, the farmers don't have the trust in the industry. Secondly, the farmers are not well protected within the law. And thirdly, the farmers are not provided with the input and advisory that they require. And that is now the part, if you look at it, the coffee bill is really attempting to, is the key area that the coffee bill is.
Let's take a break at this point, having a conversation with Henry Kinyua, chairman of the new KPCU, looking at the progress of reforms in the coffee sector. Just like he said, at some point we used to export 150,000 tons of coffee. This year we've done 35,000 tons of coffee. And we are joined by Henry Kinyua, chairman of the new KPCU, that's the new Kenya Planters Cooperative Union. They're the ones who are dealing with reforms in the coffee sector. Some basic facts about our coffee sector in the country. As told by the chairman of new KPCU, we consume, of all the coffee that we produce in the country, less than 5% is consumed locally. So about 95% is up for export. Of all the coffee that we export, if we place ourselves in the global coffee trade, we're about just less than 2%. In terms of the global coffee exports in the trade. So, like Henry Kinyua is saying, you guys can stop growing coffee. The world will not notice. But you will notice. From a time period when you used to, export over 150,000 tons in a season, in a year, now we are dealing with about 35,000 tons. Something has gone wrong, and that's why he was telling us where the rain started beating us in the late 80s and then in the 90s, and things just went south. If we compare ourselves, Henry, to the countries around us, remember in the 70s when there was a whole issue of Kenya and Uganda and Chepkube and people getting coffee crossing over Chepkube. Now, how is Uganda doing? How is Rwanda doing? And the other countries that do coffee, Ethiopia?
This is actually a very, very sad situation to report, that we are actually now the sick child of this East African community with regards to coffee. We are trading almost everybody. Ethiopia is way, way ahead. They are doing, I think, more than 8,000, bags of coffee. So they are, Uganda, in the last 5 years, when we have in fact, the last 10 years or so, when we have regressed to a third of what we used to produce, Uganda has moved on 5 times. They are now doing about 5,000 tons of, so they have moved 5. When other countries, actually this, I saw this data the other day, even Tanzania are ahead of us. So in East Africa, we can talk big, but when it comes to where it matters, volumes and value, we are not doing as well as we should. And therefore, we have an opportunity to look at what is, and I think that's why it's important to look at the coffee bill. What are these other guys done better that we can copy and see how we can go through about, or we can go on with it. And I think that's the point that the current coffee bill that's being read by CS Peter Munya and his team is really addressing those issues. And I said before, there are 2 issues of that needed to be done is maybe 3. Number 1 is farmer need to be paid promptly, paid well and paid promptly. Secondly, the issue of transparency, ensure there is proper transparency. And thirdly, the issue of effective regulation. Because I think if you look at the other countries, what they have done, whether it's Uganda, Ethiopia, they have had very, very strong regulation from the government. Here, what we did when in the name of reform, we weakened the regulator. Very, very, very significant. And weakening the regulator, that left the farmers at the mercy of whoever was at the market. So we have a lot of private players, whether it will be millers, marketers. Some are great guys who have invested and supported farmers across the industry. And others who are outrightly thugs in suits, who have really freed farmers across in so many places. So, and all that, the reason why that happens is when you don't have effective regulation. So that is where we see the issues now the new bill is trying to address. Uganda, farmer can sell their coffee from the cherry. When they say they can decide who do I sell to, whether individually, as a cooperative, and decide it at that point. Then somebody does the process and moves forward. In Kenya now, what even the new bill is trying to address, they actually address the issue of how do we ensure that when coffee is sold, the farmer is paid immediately. Because we had cases where coffee will be sold like now, I think today is Is it the 29th coffee? Today the coffee exchange will be closing. I think from now for this season they'll be started in like October and they are closing. Today will be like the last. Today Tuesday will be the last for this season until maybe open again in June, July. Before coffee will be sold in January and then farmers are paid like in July. But right now, as you have seen, immediate coffee is sold, farmers are paid. And that is part of the reforms, what the reform is pushing, that immediate coffee is sold without the option. Within 14 days, coffee need to be money need to be in the farmer. So I think these are some of the areas that this is looking at addressing to ensure that we have, we used to teach our neighbors how to do things. They are teaching us, but it is okay, it is what it is. What can we learn and how do we move forward with that?
Mr. Kinyua, there's something that I've always found puzzling, and maybe you can explain it. I'm dovetailing into what you're saying. There are countries in the world that are known to be some of the largest exporters of coffee. You're talking about Switzerland, you're talking about Germany, you're talking about Italy. And I don't think they even have a single coffee bush in their country unless... how do they then get to this position where, by being some of the largest exporters of coffee, it means coffee as a product is a huge income earner for the country, and yet they don't grow it?
No, it is not. It is actually the same. The coffee, tea, chocolate. You have Switzerland. They have never even seen a cocoa tree grows. But I think we need to really look at the history. All these were largely the colonial. There's a lot of colonial legacy into it. All these were what we call, they were extractive industries. These colonies were parts to support the kingdom, support their masters. And the idea was to extract everything, labor, their natural resources, everything, and go add value, create jobs, and create incomes on the other side. Unfortunately, that one has not changed in a large way. You look at it in a grand way of things. From an African perspective, a national perspective, and even from a commodity perspective, a lot has not really changed. And so we find that right now we have a lot of some studies, I would say, quote unquote, demonstrating why it is always better to add value outside and not here. And therefore, they have to be very, very difficult decisions. And I think that, in fact, even that's some of the big coffee bill is looking at it. How do you how do you enforce a lot of processing locally? How do you ensure that, because you find guys buying your green beans, do add value, then send you the finished product that could have been done here. So I think that's really the problem. You find that those countries, from the word go, from their forefathers, walijipanga, and that is that we kujipanga. So in that way, it is our time now, because as they say in Swahili, usipojipanga utapangwa. If you yourself are not, the other guy will be prepared to take advantage of you and such is life. And it is what it is. It's what is happening, and that is what must be reformed if you have to talk about any commodity from Africa, benefiting farmers, creating jobs, creating incomes for our people. Those are the areas that we have to look at and look at it more seriously, both from but also from the investment. Because challenges you find that, and I think, in fact, that is one area that even the Coffee Act is trying to address, is even the issues of research. You find even as a country, whether it's coffee, we've not been funding that research. So you expect a certain donor, whether it's a bilateral, to fund. When they fund research, they will not fund research to support your country. They fund research, who pays the piper, who calls the tune. And that is why now the COVID says, how can we as a country also start supporting strongly our research in coffee research institution? How can we support our marketing, from our own? And this is what the Coffee Act is also trying to look at, because when we have all these marketing support, research support, being supported by external, they have nothing against external donors, but I like to the objective. If this coffee is so important to you as a country, why can't we invest in it? And that is now some of the areas that the Coffee Act is trying to address and must be done quickly to ensure that we have our people, our researchers saying, how do we ensure we produce this quality for this market? But not the other guy just telling us, like, you guys, you cannot grow that. It's not the same science, but they're trying to just tell you cannot, simply because to maintain the status quo. Because, as they say, nobody will be happy when you're taking food from their plate. They always try to cover it.
Mr. Kinyua, let me ask this question. Are we then saying that this act that we are speaking of, while addressing these anomalies, can actually get us to a point where we are doing what these other countries do, so that we ourselves can also become a major exporter of our own coffee?
Absolutely. I think it's because, when you look at, first of all, the idea is to have when you have a very structured and effective regulation and development, And that's why they're proposing the, coming up back of the coffee board that will address the issue of markets, that will address the issue of development. Because right now, whether it's development, the input and development. So that, I think, and not just a board, but board that is well facilitated. The industry, they're covering a little bit of that cost. Then having the Coffee Research Institute addressing some of those issues that need to be done. And also providing incentives for those who really want to, to process here more. Because ideally, coffee, we can say the commodity that is globally traded is the green bean, which is what we sell. And it is, that's what we sell, that's what we export. And there's nothing wrong as long as we're able to access them. But what this law and any other need to do is also to diversify. There are so many other markets. True, we have the traditional markets, we have the green beans is what we need to go for. But there are other markets coming up that will require, whether it's Dubai, whether it's Malaysia, that will require a little bit of maybe some of the roasted beans, some other packaged products. So we need to look more. The word from the marketing side is diversification. How do we diversify? How do we create incentives to a local process, a local industry, to ensure that we diversify our coffee. We have different products that we can avail to the African market and also to the global market. So there's quite a number of these issues are being addressed, because right now we all sell 80%, like all the whole we sell the 95 whatever our coffee. That one we're all selling it at clean beans, what we call the green beans. That is what is in Ghana bags, exported in Ghana bags, and folks now, the Germans, the Italians, and the rest now go do whatever it is. Because most of it they also drink quite a bit of it, and then they go and package it and for their consumers.
Right. Okay. So I'm looking at this process of reform now and saying that, so many things happening along this reform line. And you're saying that may at least get back to where it was before in terms of exporting to that 150,000 tons per year. Below a third of that is happening now. It would mean that the input then would have to increase. And there were quite a number of people through this process where things went wrong, got frustrated and threw their arms up. Large tracts of land that they cut down their bushes and decided to do something else with. Through the process of reform, is there a possibility, would there be something for those farmers to look forward to and say, can we get back into the fold? And would there be an encouragement for them to say, come back in and join us? Because you need the input on one hand, they also need the livelihood on the other hand.
Yes. No, I think that's a very good question, and I think, and there are things that unfortunately will not change. If you look at Kiambu County, the data is maybe showing that they have lost about 12,000 hectares of used to be coffee. Is now that will not come back because Runda was coffee. Runda is not going to be coffee again. The whole of Dindigwa, all that is not going to be coffee again. The whole of Niga and Tatu cities and all these are not going to be coffee. If it is nearly the whole of Kingongwa, they're not going to be coffee again. However, the the point we have is that if we look at other areas, the south reef, and looking at Nandi. In fact, the data is last from Nandi was one of the leading counties in planting new coffee. So we have other areas that already have, that is Nandi, Trans Nzoia, some of part of Kerisho, part of Narok, part of Baringo. We have when it comes to building up the volume, you have to play two games. These new areas that is now the upcoming news, that is the South Reef, and then we're not going, which are not traditional coffee areas. That one we need a lot of support in producing new crops. So increase new land at a coffee. And that is happening and need to be, and I think even the bill is looking at it, supporting provision of seedlings, and then the county government providing extension and side. However, in these other traditional coffee producing areas, that is the one currently producing over 70% of the coffee we have. That is Kiambu, Muranga, Nyeri, Kirinyaga, Embu, Tharaka Nithi, and Meru, and Machakos. Machakos actually produces coffee, and people sometimes say not to think Machakos produces coffee. So these areas, what is the game that there we have to play what I call the productivity game. The productivity game ensuring that the few trees we have, the few bushes we have there, we renew them, but also provide the input, and then ensure that we have, we ensure that now we are able to increase the volume. Right now, on average, we are doing 2 kilos per bush of tree. Easily, guys, with the proper inputs, people do 10. In the 80s, we used to, on average, about 15. So if we can actually get enough input, and that's one part area, if you look at the new act, if we do, the part of the coffee board would also be establishing an input scheme that will be able to support that. So this being addressed in that manner, and also if we look at also the role within the act, the role of the county government is well spelled out, because agriculture is devolved, fully devolved. But then we have this is there is the legal part that is dealt at the national level. So these issues is the act spelled out in how to ensure, number one, there is the input. And input, we are talking fertilizer, we are talking of, in fact, input, you need to look at it from even, not even the fertilizer, not even from research. Because, what seedlings do we need? What is the best seedlings is the best seedling in Kinyua, the same in Nandi, the same in Trans Nzoia. So get that research. Then get these seedlings availed, and that's why Coffee Research Institute is being revived and supported financially to provide that. Then you have now the normal input that we have the coffee board will set a program, set away from a legal perspective, set a very clear framework of how farmers inputs to be available to the farmers, that the right input at the right time in the right form, and also they are able to in the amount in the manner that farmers can afford and access.
Mr. Kinyua, let me ask this question. There's a lot of land that previously coffee was grown on, which has now turned into real estate. Does this new act or this new program is it looking into introducing coffee into new areas of Kenya, looking for additional capacity so that coffee can be grown in larger quantities?
Mm-hmm. I think it's basically that's what I'm still looking at it in terms of, and this will be more. I'm actually, maybe this one I'll say it. I don't know. I know my brothers from Central Kenya need to know this, that in the next 10 years, 5 years, I think that the new coffee areas will be the South Coast, the Central and South Rift. All these are the areas that are growing maize now. They are taking coffee very, very serious. So we have a lot of that coming in, and that's what I say, strengthening of coffee research institution will support the provision of the seedling, because you need the seeds and the seedlings in large quantities, and that now is the issue. Then when it comes to the input, in other fertilizer and all that, ensuring those are there, but also the other area that are produced, the central area that have been producing coffee also, is now looking at it. How do we ensure these areas are provided with inputs to increase their productivity, and also there is transparency in the handling and the marketing of the coffee, to make sure that farmers not only feel, but they can experience real income in their, they need to have more money in their pocket, and then they can be encouraged to go back to farm. In fact, some of these areas in Central, it's not so bad, actually. I can tell, like when I was at CC in Nyeri had about 14 million coffee bushes. About 2 million have been complete neglect. We have about 12 million that are picked in one form or the other. In the whole country, we have a similar, that is this one. We have a very clear program of input. In 2-3 years, you can actually ramp up from the current to, you can easily double the current production by just provide the input. In 3 years, you can be back to 100,000 and 100,000, and in 5, you'll be on 50 and we'll be back to where we are, and even better.
I'm getting a comment here from Noana Siali, who's an expert in the field as well. And he says, extension services have to be improved. Farmers need to be trained on soil testing to improve the yield. And he basically goes ahead to say just what you've said. Farmers are now getting about 3 kilograms per plant per year. They should be getting about that, and they are currently getting just about 0.7 kilograms per plant. You're saying even there's a time when you used to get about even 15. The other thing that he's talking about is support of this sector by the county governments. Agriculture is devolved. If a county government is allocating less than 5% of its budget to agriculture, is this sufficient to kickstart this sector really?
No, I think that's, I think he's raised very pertinent points in terms of the current production. We can easily, with providing the right extension services and the input, we can triple the current production from 2 kilos to 6 easily. Farmers, the same farmers, in fact, I see the age of the farmers. The interesting is what has not been changing is the same farmers who are there. So the same farmers who are producing 10 kilos per bush, they are doing 2 because the support system that existed was not there. In fact, it's unfortunate that we have seen a lot of extension services being downplayed, the importance of it being downplayed. It is important to say this. Extension services support, it is as important as teachers are to the education sector, or doctors and health workers to the health sector. If you cannot have, you have a health sector without without nurses, doctors, and other health workers. You cannot say you have education system without teachers and another support system. This likewise, you cannot say you have an agriculture sector without the extension system, and that's one we killed long time ago from the structured adjustment programs of the 80s. Do you know, like from 1986, the whole Kenya never employed the extension worker until 2006 during Kibaki government. They employed a few, and then from there. So what you'll find is now, I can almost say without a fear of contradiction, almost every county, the extension workers by 50 to 70% are over 50 years. And in the next 5 years, if counties will not have invested, we will not even have any extension service. And then the problem then we also have, we talk about bringing on the private sector, but we've not had a very clear, we've not had a very clear program of how to support that private sector. So we are talking private sector, but do we have a real plan for the private sector? So these are the areas that you see, as I think, counties are the current now, almost all the counties are doing 5-7%. I'm like, guys, we have to do minimum 10. That has been accepted globally to affect for this sector. And I think once the counties look at that, it's not only the coffee that will be, it's all the other agricultural commodities.
What can coffee do for the country's economy in terms of its potential? What can actually happen with what is currently available in the country? If you did a forecast and say, what could it contribute to an elevated economic profile for Kenya, what can it actually offer?
I think it's like we are saying right now, we're saying this year it offered, we are saying it just did, this is just pure income per income. It did 17 million. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, we say it do 17 billion. So that one we say we can easily do 5 times that. That is now directly forex income. The other thing that coffee can do and will do very significant was done is also create a lot of employment in the rural areas. From we have the youth in extension services, youth in new grafting, harvesting, and also the particular new law is also coming up of also making it easier for even other youth for roasting, to have licensing for making use for the roasting. So we have young people and other, investing in that in terms of how to roast their coffee, and we start getting more coffee consumed. So there's quite a lot of the issue that a lot of benefits that can come out of this when coffee is well supported.
You're looking at all the reforms that you've talked about, and I can't help but think about the ongoing reforms in the tea sector and the kind of pushback that the ministry is getting with the implementation of the reforms. There is a new law that has been passed, but then implementation of it is being challenged in court. There are all these, elections. Do we have elections? Do we not have elections? And I'm just wondering, the same kind of players who've been benefiting from the haphazardness of the coffee sector, are they not, digging in to push back against these reforms? And what plans do you have in place to mitigate that?
I think that's a good point. It is, and this is not really unique to. It's not very unique to the Kenyans and the coffee sector. Everywhere, when we have any public reforms, all these issues are expected because for a reform, for there to be a need for reforms, it demonstrates that something was not working. But it doesn't mean that something was not working. What happens is something was benefiting from that lacuna, from that weakness that was there. So when you are fixing it, you can say you are actually so they will fight.
Mr. Kinyua, let me ask this question. Is there any law?
Is that you have a committed, a committed executive. Right now, I think there is a very clear plan to make sure everybody is involved. Hello?
Yes.
Yes, to make sure that everybody is involved. So we'll definitely have people digging in, and this has always been the when you say private sector. Because what happens in every public policy, the losers lose immediately. So the losers lose immediately, but the benefits take long to be realized. So when the losers are powerful, they fight to the end because this was their livelihood, and that is why you see quite a lot of that. And therefore, as the person pushing for reform, because the leader of the reforms, it is very important
for the success. And in this case, the good thing is that the person pushing these reforms is the current CS, Peter Munya, who is already known not to have any fear in creating back, but also try to make sure everybody is involved. He was, I think, a lot of that, in fact, when I followed him in the last one December. He went all over the country trying to do this public participation, taking views from all over and taking views from farmers, from everybody. That demonstrates that his willingness to ensure that all the views are taken care. However, at the same time, being ready to address those that might decide it is the time to fight and dig in. So there's a lot I can tell you, I think, and he has been very clear on that. He has a very clear plan how to make sure that once the reforms begin, there's no turning back.
Henry Kinyua, we want to thank you very much for joining us this morning. Henry is the chairman of the New Kenya Planters Cooperative Union, New KPCU, speaking to us about the reforms in the coffee sector and what's happening now for the benefit of the farmers. There's a bill that's